Welcome to Tech Talks. I'm Holly Scott. I am thrilled to have with me today Dr. Mark Turco. Dr. Turco is the president of Genesis MedTech Vascular for North America and also the CEO of JC Medical. Very unique role, which I'm excited to dive into. Thank you for joining us today, Mark.
Holly, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Dr. Turco has an extensive career. He started as an interventional cardiologist. He moved into leadership within the healthcare system, certainly a leader in his own right. He moved into industry eventually and did big things at both Covidien as well as Medtronic, and has graced us with moving into the startup world, which we love, and is now with an organization that is focused in structural heart, JC Medical. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the venture and sharing more about what's exciting with this particular platform, Mark.
Holly, and again, it's great to be here, and thank you. And you know, the med tech sector, as you well know, and you live it every day, just like I do, it's a fabulous field, and especially this cardiovascular field. And so, you know, it's not for the faint of heart, but you know, certainly I think all of us that are involved in it love it day in and day out.
Yeah, not for the faint of heart, no pun intended, of course, of course. And I know we're going to jump into the technology and what's going on there, but I would be remiss to not at least comment and chat a bit about your career, because it has been unique, and there are people in the audience who aspire to do things as you have. So moving from a clinician into industry, can you tell us a little bit about that path and what brought you to us today?
Yeah, no, I've been blessed. You know, I've had a great career and a lot of diversity, you know, throughout my different paths. You know, I must say, you know, working the number of years that I did in clinical practice as an interventionalist, it is a true honor and privilege to take care of patients. And I think, you know, we always need to keep that in the forefront, whether that was me as a physician or in what I'm doing now in my operating roles. And so, you know, I had a great time working in the cath lab and working with the teams and doing what we did, you know, day in and day out. I made the transition because a great opportunity kind of came to the forefront. That was in the day when Covidien was moving from a pure surgical company into a vascular and surgical company, and they made the acquisition of EV3. And once Covidien brought EV3 in, they then were looking for a vascular chief medical officer, and moved over into Covidien and was blessed with working with two great leaders at Covidien at that time, the CEO, Joe Almeida, who is just a fantastic leader and is now running Baxter and has been at Baxter for quite some time, and Stacy Enzensing, who was the president of EV3. And I owe a lot to Stacy over the years for a lot of the mentorship and advice and help that she's given my career. The transition is not always an easy transition. It's very different from being a physician in the cath lab and doing what you do day in and day out, and making that transition to the industry side. And you know, it takes a little bit of time to get used to it. I would probably, the biggest piece of advice that I would give folks is make sure that you're ready for the transition, really assess the opportunity, because each of these opportunities on the industry side, when you transition, are a bit different in the job description and what is asked of you. But then also really hone in on your influence skills, because your influence skills are critically important, as important, if not more important than they were as a practicing physician.
Boy, that's excellent advice. That is excellent advice. I'm seeing that from several different views, but from my lens, certainly from a career perspective, I can only imagine the practice of medicine. It's been rooted in time and time again. It's so much of it is black and white, right? And when you work in a business setting, hardly anything is black and white. Everything has shades of gray, and the ability to engage and influence and really collaborate and make things happen in that kind of an environment, that's got to be completely different than practicing medicine.
Yeah, no doubt. It is very different, but it's also exciting and it's a challenge. And I know you and the Mullings group believe this, in the advice that you give all the folks that work with you is take the risk. If it seems right, take the risk, make the transition, and learn new skill sets. Each of my transitions, and I've made several. There's always learnings within those moves that hopefully have allowed me to be better as a person, better as a leader, and overall led to more enjoyment and fulfillment.
And you went from touching one patient at a time to touching hundreds and thousands, and that transition that you were part of with Covidien, which was such an interesting time in the marketplace. We've seen over the last 20 going on 30 years now, the transition, especially in cardiovascular medicine, going from every surgical procedure being open and cracking the rib cage and having 5 to 10 days of recovery period at minimum, stays in the hospital and such, moving to these less invasive approaches. It's been going on now for decades. What's really interesting for purpose of our intent today is the movement in TAVR, specifically heart valve replacement. And as I was doing some research just to look at the numbers, in the U.S. alone, over 100,000 heart surgeries are happening based on valves in particular. And although growing incredibly rapidly, less than a third are TAVR candidates. However, with that said, they're double-digit growth exponentially over the last 10 years. So there's a lot going on there, and the idea being moving intervention, moving surgical repair to a less invasive, less cumbersome, easier recovery for the patient is the movement. And you were part of that at Covidien. I think that's really interesting that you were part of that huge endeavor. Were there some similarities to what you're seeing in terms of the structural heart movement being more specific around valves to what you experienced back during the Covidien days?
Yeah, what's interesting in the valve space, first of all, each heart valve obviously has its own issues, whether we're talking about aortic, whether we're talking about mitral or tricuspid. On the tricuspid side is, are we going to get good right ventricular remodeling over time in the treatment of tricuspid regurgitation? On the mitral side, very complex. How are we going to avoid left ventricular outflow tract obstruction? On the aortic side now, which has been a fascinating space, it's seeing the evolution from going to those patients who are very high risk, inoperable patients for aortic stenosis to now the lower risk patients. And really what we're seeing on the aortic stenosis front for the treatment of aortic valve disease is a honing in now of optimizing the treatments and therapies in the valves. How can we get these valves durable and more durable for the more intermediate and lower risk patients? Where we're working right now with JC Medical and with our J-valve technology is in the aortic regurgitation space. This is another example of a great opportunity where really there are a lot of patients that are too high risk to undergo surgical procedures. And what we want to try to do now is provide them with a transcatheter option for their aortic regurgitation, an easy to use procedure similar to just putting a balloon expandable or self-expandable valve for aortic stenosis, and then basically allow those patients to improve their ventricular function over time. If I have a crystal ball on where I think the field will go in aortic regurgitation, hopefully it would follow what we've seen with aortic stenosis, where we can ultimately treat patients a bit earlier into the disease process, get patients before they have significant volume overload of their left ventricle when there already is impairment of the left ventricle. You want to get patients earlier. That doesn't come without struggles from a regulatory standpoint, struggles from a clinical trial design standpoint, all of the issues there that the aortic stenosis arm has basically taught us. But I do think the field will continue to evolve, and that was one of the exciting aspects that drew me to the to JC Medical, Genesis MedTech, and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. And then for our audience who may not be aware, of course, aortic and mitral are the most common valve replacements or valve repair, valve issues, so to speak. And the stenosis is the one that the current procedures are treating. They're regulated and approved to treat aortic stenosis. Stenosis is hardening, so to speak, and then the regurgitation is another common issue. I would say it's almost as common from what I'm reading, but they're not treating it in the same way, where JC has the opportunity to do so with their technology. So that opens up a different candidate population for the procedure and allows us to potentially intervene, as you mentioned, sooner, and getting them in a healthier place for this fairly less invasive. Well, it's a fairly simple procedure, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, I mean, wearing my physician hat, I never like to call it a simple procedure, because when you call something simple, that's when you can obviously get into trouble with complications. But at the same time, it is a straightforward procedure, and our job, as valve manufacturers and developers and innovators in this space, Holly, is to basically bring safe and effective technologies to the market, but then make sure that they are easy to use and are straightforward. And one of the advantages, for example, of our valve is the ability to kind of self-center itself within the aortic annulus, which basically allows for physicians to really have an easy time in placing it, even if you have a very angulated or curved aorta, to place that valve. So, that's where the new valves are heading. And, we're looking at dedicated valves for each specific type of pathophysiology that we're trying to treat within the heart. So it's a very exciting time in the field, and the structural heart space in general is an incredible field to be a part of.
It certainly is. It's certainly growing, and it's one that there's boy, is it an art and a science, right? Especially as you look at, and I know we're predominantly dealing with a population who's dealing with these issues over age or for some reason. But as the mother of a child with a congenital heart issue, I know that structural heart is going to live to 110, by the way. I know that structural heart cognizance and intelligence is the future. There is so much going on there. It's really, really fascinating.
Now, it's so exciting what can be done in this space, both on the adult side and the pediatric side, to your point. With new valve treatments for the pulmonary valve, percutaneous treatments, there are a lot of opportunities now for both pediatric and adult patients to, receive very good transcatheter treatments for their structural heart abnormalities.
Yes, without question, and it's exciting. It's exciting. So this technology is what drew you. This initial technology is what drew your interest into JC. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's always, and you can appreciate this with the great work that you guys do, is it's never one thing. The technology is one piece, but then it's the people and ultimately the strategy and the organization in general, that drew me. So JC Medical is a fully owned subsidiary of the larger Genesis MedTech. Genesis MedTech is a Singapore-based company that currently generates much of its commercial revenue through China, through collaborations with Shockwave, with Penumbra, with surgical products and vascular products as well in the coronary, peripheral intervention, and neurointerventional space. And what was interesting to me when I started to look at this opportunity, it reminded me a little bit back to our earlier discussion of the EV3 days and Covidian days, where Genesis MedTech, under the great leadership of Warren Wang, who is the CEO and had a long history at J&J and Boston Scientific, basically Warren's vision is to really do a nice roll up here that hits many international markets and really build out well beyond China into all of the international geographies that we could possibly go into, with JC Medical currently being its footprint for the United States and North America in general. And so, that strategy and that opportunity and that challenge, quite honestly, is really one of the things that attracted me, along with Warren's leadership, along with the people that were at JC Medical, and then obviously the great technology that we have in our initial foray into the structural heart space with our J valve for aortic regurgitation.
You're 100% right. The people are so much of what drives the success of an organization. And when you and I started chatting about you taking on this venture, and I started doing my homework, when I realized the leadership that has been brought in on the interventional side, on the biomaterial side, on the business side, the venture side, and good friends of firm that are just outstanding rock stars that complement you in cardiology and other areas of domain. And then, of course, getting to know Warren and some of the team within the Genesis umbrella. This is an organization that I expect to continue to be very successful. The emphasis on people and product is second to none in terms of best-in-class products that they're going after and that you're looking at and ensuring. That does ring very closely to the COVIDian days of EV3 when it was best-in-class products that were coming up under and creating this entity. So it's truly exciting to see an organization that operates like JC, like has the startup, the scrappiness and the resourcefulness of a startup and the goals ahead, of course, as a startup, yet has such a strong back end of support that's there to help with resources and to help with the globalization efforts.
Yeah, very, very well said. And it is about the quality of the technology and bringing, best in class technologies, and hopefully to use a cliche word a little bit, transformational technologies to the space. It's not what can we do to kind of bring lower cost products. Yes, we want to bring lower cost products, but if they're lower cost and truly transformational and effective and high quality, that's really what we want to do in this space. And that's the leadership within Genesis and our culture that we're trying to build, certainly as well in JC Medical.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should talk a bit about that cost piece, because I sometimes feel it's misconstrued. In the JC valve that we've discussed, and just doing some of my homework, some cost it can be money too, and you hit on there. Cost can be money, cost can be time, and when you talked about the ease of use compared to other perhaps delivery systems and the ease of placement and perhaps procedural time overall, complexity, results. All of those pieces are time-based. They also impact patient. They also impact patient recovery, and they certainly impact cost, because time is cost in a hospital setting for sure. And I think sometimes when we think cost, it almost dumbs down the implication, where in this case, when we're looking at, let's keep the patient under for the shortest amount of time possible, let's get them home in the quickest amount of time possible, that's where that value is. And that's the cost, right? That's the value associated with it.
Yeah, no, Holly, well said. And you're exactly right. I mean, if we look at what we're trying to do with transcatheter approaches and dealing with high-risk patients, some that don't even undergo surgical procedures because they're too high risk, how can we get those patients through a procedure, get them their quality of life back, and get them out of the hospital, and ultimately keep them out of the hospital as best we can. And that's the paradigm that we're trying to do and all trying to search for now, as to how to optimize the systems of care to, again, get them through the initial procedure, and then keep them away from the tertiary centers for readmission, where ultimately, costs can accelerate, over time. I think, we're in a world where costs are important. Innovation, if we don't watch our costs on the innovation side, it's going to be hard for hospitals and health systems and GPOs and others to bring in some of these new technologies. So we need to, when we do our clinical trials, really make sure that we have health economics also in the forefront of what we're trying to accomplish here, in the treatment with our new technologies.
Yeah, it's smart, forward thinking, and important to the value of the organization. What are so right now, and to what you can discuss, what are some of our challenges as we move forward with a product like this?
Yeah, I think the challenges are, how do we basically, and you mentioned resourcing it, how do we basically, decide, you know, what patient population we want to ultimately treat to maximize the ability to have a clinically relevant trial, but at the same time, make sure that we can accelerate our trial enrollment and also fulfill the requirements that we need from an FDA standpoint in the United States. So I think that they're some of the major issues that we think about on a day in and day out basis at the stage that we are in, where we're entering in the near term an early feasibility study and then hopefully going to move quickly into a pivotal, study. How can we do that? So the end goal of what we're trying to accomplish, obviously, is PMA approval by the FDA so that we can ultimately bring this valve to market and serve the patient population that is currently not really being treated because there are no commercial available, opportunities at the current time. I think the other thing to think about, and I know all of my colleagues that are, in my position think about this on a regular basis, is how can we design out in our companies a quality system that does not encumber or be a hindrance to our development, a quality system that will allow us to move through our design control processes that will ultimately lead us to a seamless submission for the FDA so that we can get those approvals that are needed on the preclinical testing. Mm-hmm. And the FDA over the years, under the leadership of the leaders there that are now through CDRH, have done a fabulous job of looking at just-in-time, testing and all of the other pieces that they put in to the regulatory environment to help companies like ours move through the process.
It's good to hear that there's progress on the support side and direction, especially with innovation. Sometimes the most challenging areas, those pioneers that are navigating those regulatory waters early and starting to figure out what's acceptable, what's good enough, where are we. And you're spot on in thinking quality system early rather than later, right? Before the more proactive you can be regarding quality system and design control adherence, the less likely you'll have turbulence downrange. So some really good advice. That's excellent. Well, in terms of your vision, now that we have JC here with our footprint, and you have a bigger role there, you have a structural heart business that you're going after. What are some of the things you're seeing as potential or exciting for JC as we grow here in the U.S.?
Well, I still don't think, I think there's a lot of opportunity on the tricuspid and mitral side. There's still areas to move with treatment, for example, of left atrial appendage. Obviously, Boston Scientific's Watchman technology is a leading and very good technology. Newer technologies are coming down the pike. So there, and then the whole field of interventional heart failure obviously is a huge opportunity there. And I throw that into the bucket a little bit of structural heart. There are areas that we're going to be looking at to build out our structural heart platform as one of our verticals. Within Genesis MedTech, we have that structural heart vertical, and then we have what we call our vascular vertical, which is the coronary, the peripheral, and the neurovascular, and then the surgical vertical. So basically 3 verticals that we're going to work with to build out in the international markets and to follow what has been a very successful campaign, I must say, through China in many product launches and bringing good technology to that particular marketplace for the patients in the region.
Excellent. Well, it's exciting to see that things continue. I remember, well, I don't know, about 30 days ago or so, you and Joe and Rick were talking about, this reminded me of it, the integration of imaging and cath lab and technologies and how that all could really harmonize together. If we could put away the turf wars, right, and we could really start thinking more strategically about the patient. And as we're talking about structural, we're seeing so much bubble up in the market in terms of non-invasive diagnostic tools that can be used, like little Band-Aids on the chest that can, monitor EKG, that can monitor heart, blood flow, blood pressure and such. It would be interesting to see a future that involves some collaboration with structural heart and more of a preventative health measure for perhaps these patient populations. There's some real exciting things ahead of us if we can continue and innovate and be open to them.
Yeah, well, much of our discussion has been around the treatment, and you used a very important word that we need to get at here is prevention. And prevention is critically important from a patient standpoint, from the health economics of what we're trying to do globally with the treatment of patients. And so we do need to move our care toward, more preventive care. And then when we do treat patients is how can we basically have that hospital to home and monitor patients from the home so that they're not readmitted. And in this field of structural heart and interventional heart failure, that's where many of the newer, technologies, whether they be implantable or wearables or other, artificial intelligence-based technologies are going to be, critically important to help guide, our implantable devices and treatments over time. It's a very exciting, time period. There's a lot of tremendous innovation going on, despite, some of the geopolitical issues that are going on in the world, and despite some of the macroeconomic environment that we are living in. It's an amazing time for MedTech and for what we're doing on the innovation front.
I'm with you. I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm also a big believer in putting the patients first every single day, everything we do, and it pays off. Even through the economic cycles that we go through, MedTech always seems to bubble to the top. So we're in a good place. Well, Mark, I really sincerely appreciate it. I knew you would be a fabulous guest and incredibly informative, and I was not wrong. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Holly, thank you, and thank you for all the great work in the field and to you and the whole team. So appreciate being here today.
Thank you so much. And to our audience, thanks for joining us on Tech Talks. See you next time.